Hello, I am Dan Stapleton, and this is the IGN review discussion for Bloodborne. With me here is Chloe Rad.
Hey guys.
Marty Sleva.
Hey!
And our reviewer, Brandon Terrell.
Hello.
Brandon, you gave this game a 9.1 for amazing.
I sure did.
And here is what you said.
Bloodborne is an amazing, exacting, and exhausting pilgrimage through a gorgeous land that imposes the feeling of approaching the bottom of a descent into madness. Though extended load times and minor frame rate hitches have an effect on the pacing, it's otherwise an intensely challenging and rewarding game. There's an incredible power to unlocking its mysteries and in succeeding, despite its demand for a pound of your flesh. For more on Bloodborne, stick with IGN.
All right, everybody, you know what Brandon thinks. What do you think? Do you agree or disagree with his review, Chloe?
I completely agree. I actually probably would have scored it higher. I really love this game. It was really great. Yeah.
Just calling you out.
Wow, she's super
you
calling.
think you're better than me?
What? No.
What do you think the performance issues were not as big of an issue as Brandon had, or what's the difference of opinion here?
No, the loading screens were definitely really bad, and I think did you also have a problem with the
frame rate?
Was it the frame rate? So I don't really mind the frame rate too much. Like it's 30 FPS.
Yeah.
I believe, yeah.
Locked.
I feel like it gives it kind of a more cinematic experience. I think Dark Souls 2 had 60 frames per second, and that kind of threw me off. Everything felt really like light and kind of
Like gamier, kind of?
Yeah, like I like that Bloodborne and Dark Souls feel heavier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, like Dark Souls 2, when it was running at 60 on PC, it almost felt like when you go into a Best Buy and like watch a movie being displayed on like a display TV.
Smooth motion.
Yeah, where you're like, well, this looks weird. I don't know if this looks good or bad, but it just looks different than everything else.
I think a bunch of heads just exploded when you suggested 30 frames is better than 60.
I know.
But okay.
I know it's a really big debate. Like I'm a PC gamer, and I'm saying that. So like but no, I think it works fine. But the loading screens killed me. Yeah. Those, especially because you have to keep going back to the hub world if you want to like reload all your items.
Right. So that was the other part that got me too, is that there's so much loading in the game, especially because you have to go back to the hub world rather than being able to teleport between lamps. So
yeah.
I'm curious, was that as big of a deal for you as it was for me?
Yeah. That I didn't like how you couldn't rest at lamps. That would have been a lot. It would have really streamlined the process of like grinding, especially, like being able to respawn everything just by going back to the lamp instead of 40-second loading to the hub world, 40-second loading back to where you want to go. Like, it didn't feel very efficient.
It's a little quicker than 40 seconds going back to the hub, but coming back is still 40 seconds, which is it's like a full minute of loading at that point.
Yeah, I mean, bottom line, there's a lot of load screens in Bloodborne.
Yeah.
Marty, what did you think? Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I primarily agree with everything Brandon said and Chloe. I love this game. The combat, the atmosphere, the world, the boss design, the level design. Brandon really liked the Chalice Dungeons, which are sort of the procedurally generated things that you can share with your friends online. I'm not crazy about them, if only because I think the procedurally generated nature of them go against what makes the Souls series world and levels so amazing, is that there are these sort of very like curated, bespoke things with very distinct enemy placement and very distinct trap placement and level design, and to procedurally generate that sort of takes the magic out of it a little bit. Like, I appreciate the fact that it's giving you something new every time and unexpected, but I don't think, like those, to me, the Chalice Dungeons as a whole feel B tier to the levels in the actual like main campaign.
No, I think that's fair, and I would agree with that. The only counterpoint I would say to it is that I totally agree with you that I love Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, sort of really, like you said, curated, very deliberate, meticulous design, meticulous placement. But once you're through that, like that's it. Like you have PvP, you've got cooperative stuff.
Yeah.
There's really not much more to it. So what I do like about the Chalice Dungeons is it gives you an opportunity to be surprised again for the first time in this world, and this world can be super surprising. We were recording a commentary yesterday, and a zombie jumped out of a coffin.
I got scared.
And
I got spooked.
You.
I got super spooked live on television.
Yeah. It was
spooky. It was a spooky scene in 2015.
So Brandon, you appreciate the variety from randomization, even though it goes against the core design of Bloodborne.
I mean, I don't know that I agree it goes against the core design. I think it's supplementary to the core design.
Yeah, it's like a side thing.
Yeah, I don't think that this is really the marquee feature. Nobody goes to the show to see a secondary, the second stage or whatever. But I think it's something that helps. It helps after you've gotten that big marquee feature out of the way. After you've seen all there is to see, the Chalice Dungeons add a little something extra if you want to spend more time in that world.
Let's move on then to the next question, which is, And we'll start with you, Brandon. What is your favorite thing about Bloodborne, and what is your least favorite thing about Bloodborne?
That's a good question. So, well, my least favorite thing, probably the load times, but it all kind of is wrapped up together in this big ball of snakes. It's
A ball of snakes.
yeah, which
Why is it always snakes?
It's always snakes. It's the load times, but it's also how the game design, and it's not really fair to say because being able to warp between bonfires and Dark Souls is a very Dark Souls thing. So coming into Bloodborne, because the games are so closely tied together, we might think that we're owed that, right? Like that is something that we should that's something that should be in the game, but it's a different game, right? And there might be reasons for taking it out, but coming from Dark Souls into Bloodborne and losing that functionality, it stings, And then you add on top of that the 40-second load times for a death, 40-second load times for warping into an area, 15 to 20-second load times for going back to the Hunter's World, and then having to go back to the Hunter's World and then back to your area.
A little bit of a drag.
Yeah,
but very quickly, what's your first? What's your best thing about?
Oh, the
Bloodborne?
world, absolutely the world. Combat's great. I love the faster nature of it, but the world is every time I step into a From Software game. And I step into a new area for the first time, it's the most important moment of my life. It's it is this awe-inspiring thing to step into the woods and wonder, I'm going to die in every corner of this place, and I know it, and that's a really powerful experience.
Marty, best thing, worst thing?
Yeah, mine sort of echo that. The world design's incredible. I really like, in particular, just, the atmosphere is great, the environment's great, but the level design is really smart in the way that the bonfire lanterns are spaced out really far apart, but there's so many sort of shortcuts you open up as you're exploring the world, where as soon as you venture out and are like, man, I am way too far from home, I am super worried that I'm gonna die, lose all my progress, all of a sudden you stumble upon a switch and you're like, well, what does this do? You pull it, you enter an elevator, and bam, you're back at the central area. You're like, all right, well, I just opened up a shortcut that is gonna save me 45 minutes going forward. And I love that sort of, it's like that sensation I felt in Dark Souls 1 when I got to the church and then I went down the elevator and got back to the Firelink Shrine. And I'm like, oh man, this is the kind of game this is. That's my favorite thing. Worst thing, load times, and it feels anti-player to have to go back to the Hunter's Dream every time I want to level up or buy something or travel elsewhere in the world. I don't think it adds anything to the game. Not being able to do that from specific lanterns, to me, is just time-consuming, and it's not a smart design decision, in my opinion.
Chloe, best thing, worst thing?
So mine are kind of actually very similar to yours, Marty, but I will build on so the level design always is one of my favorite things about Souls games, but I think with Bloodborne in particular, I beat the game last night. So I got close to beating the game the other night. I knew that I was at the end, but I also knew that I had these optional bosses that I had to go through, right? I thought it was just going to be run through these kind of side areas, but it turned out to be 10 extra hours of things to do.
Yeah.
And I could have completely beat the game without ever seeing any of that, until New Game Plus, So just the fact that there are all these optional areas, but they're so fleshed out and developed. The amount of detail in this game is just incredible.
Totally.
For the con, though, I'm gonna have to go with the lamp system, the bonfire system. It's just not streamlined at all, and it is kind of frustrating. But everything else is great.
So let's talk combat in Bloodborne. This is very different from Dark Souls. It's faster paced, more diving, rolling. There are guns. What do you guys think about it?
I really like this new pace.
Yeah?
The game is angrier and more violent and more out to get you than the previous Soul games. Yeah. Whereas Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2 was very sword and board, where you sort of had a shield, you had a sword, and you were sort of always hunkered behind that shield. You don't have that in this game. Everything wants to kill you, and you can't just hang back and let the world sort of unfold around you. You have to get in there, and you have to get messy. Literally get messy, because you're going to be slashing through things and getting blood and viscera all over you.
You'll be covered.
Yeah, so I'm totally digging it.
I really love the way the regain system kind of negates your need for a shield. That it encouraged a more aggressive approach to combat, and I thought that worked really well.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of your de facto sustainability, right? In that sense. Like I wrote in the first part of my review in progress, I don't think either are better than the other, but I think they're definitely different, and I think getting to know each of them differently is sort of valuable. As a methodical player, I'm more inclined to do the Dark Souls sort of pick my moments, take my shots, dance around, soak up some damage with my shield if I have to. So Bloodborne was sort of an opposite direction for me. The first 2 hours or something, I was not really getting the premise that and even in some of the later boss fights, but hanging back with my halberd, waiting to hit that one hard shot. Whereas I feel Bloodborne is really best played by getting up in their face and like hammering them, like just hammering them.
Yeah.
You know,
Literally in some cases.
yeah,
Totally,
literally.
I feel like
Kirk
it's
Hammer,
the Kirk Hammer. It's a tough game. It's gonna be a tough game for people who played the Soul series
Yeah.
and were pyromancers or sorcerers.
Yeah.
Because magic ostensibly doesn't exist in this game. There are items.
It does.
They're very late game though.
Oh
Yeah.
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 But so it's very much like you have to choose from, and there's a lot fewer weapons than there are in previous Souls games. But I like that because the weapons have their own personality, and it doesn't seem like there's any throwaway weapons. Whereas in Dark Souls, like by the end of it, you have 50 weapons, and you're like, I'm going to use 3 of these.
What's your favorite weapon?
Oh man, honestly, like so I love the transforming aspect of the weapons,
Yes.
and starting off with that saw cleaver, like that's just like such a great, satisfying feeling.
Yeah.
It's that iconic weapon that they've been showing since the game's
Yeah.
launch,
Sure.
but just getting in there and your quick strikes and oof.
But man, the Hunter Axe by
Yeah,
far
that
is
was
the
mine
best
too.
transforming weapon in my opinion, because not only do you have relatively quick slashes with the one-handed, but you unfold that baby and then you take a step back. I got through literally like the first 2 levels of the game by walking up to a monster, watching him like lift his axe up, and then I take a step back and he swings, and then I just deliver this earth-shattering, like I cut him in half with an
The
axe.
charge spin was great too. That saved me so many times.
Charge spin is amazing.
I also absolutely love the way the actual transformation of the weapons plays into the combo system.
Yeah,
It looks so cool.
It is very cool to like hit 2 slow slashes, unfold the axe, and then finish it up.
And
or
the
poke.
Kirk hammer was ridiculous.
Yeah.
The Kirk
The
hammer
sword
is just
hammer.
silly.
Yeah, the Kirk
is
hammer,
there-
which is ostensibly a sword that you put into a hammer in your back and it becomes a giant hammer.
Can we also talk about the wooden shield? How that
How sad it is.
that was
I
just,
feel like it's sort
it
of a
was
middle
definitely
finger to
joke.
Dark
It
Souls,
was definitely a
right?
joke,
It's like,
yeah.
don't worry, there are shields in here, but you throw on that wooden shield and you use it, and you still take like a healthy chunk of damage. Like
I'm
chip
waiting
damage
for
is
shield
stupid.
only run.
What do you guys think about the secondary weapons? I mean, you've got guns in this game.
I mean, I think the reason that none of us jumped to really talk about them is the fact that they are supportive weapons. They are not the sexy sort of, marquee weapons of the game that transform and do all kinds of crazy trick stuff. But they're, vital, super vital. Like they lend that level of support that you use. You use guns to stun enemies. You use guns to pull enemies towards you. And then there's, some fancier stuff that surprisingly, like, of all the supportive weapons, like the torch for me was the most useful thing, because there's so much darkness in a From Software game. But of course, there's like sexier ones like the flamethrower and all
totally.
kinds
Yeah,
of
It was
stuff.
fun, yeah.
Yeah, enemies in this game tend to hate fire a lot. So
Yeah.
combining your torch with throwing oil on an enemy and then using your torch.
Yeah.
Did you guys find yourself using the visceral attacks a lot, like stunning enemies with the gun and then?
Yeah, I a handful of the boss fights, especially, those were great. Seeing an enemy get down on one knee, stagger to the ground, and then you run up to them. You're able to do this insane attack where you just put your hand in their eyeball and pull it
For
out.
me,
It's
like
gross.
in Dark Souls, like the parry repost was such an important part of like the game. But like I feel like whenever I did stun enemies, it was always on accident.
Yeah,
I would try to plan it and it wouldn't work.
I almost feel like charge attacking in the back is the most consistent way of hitting your parry riposte visceral attack damage. Because you go up there with the gun, and if you want to be in range to hit the visceral attack after you stun them, you're basically putting yourself in harm's way, which I understand is sort of the same principle as the parry, but getting really up close and then missing that gunshot by a fraction of a second is super painful.
Yeah.
Like it's really, really hard to deal with.
Is
so.
there anything you guys don't like about the combat or think it should have done better?
The dodging didn't seem as effective as it does in Dark Souls. Like you
Yeah.
have the invincibility frames in Dark Souls, right?
Yeah.
Now if you're locked onto an enemy, you sidestep instead of dodging. You have to like be not locked on if you want to roll around.
Yeah.
I feel like there still are some frames though that you're relatively safe.
Yeah,
in.
like it. Yeah, I don't know.
But like the terrain that you cover is definitely, it feels a little more limited in Bloodborne, right? A lot of times I found myself just dropping targeting and just rolling like a madman around to the other side, retargeting, and then doing what I need to.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a game that favors people who liked playing kind of fast, nimble, like featherweights. You're not gonna, you're not gonna feel like you're wearing that like Onion Knight armor or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you ostensibly, no matter what you're wearing, you are a fast, agile character.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and even when you're spec'd to like take a lot of physical punishment, like I didn't feel too much difference there.
Yeah.
That was another significant difference between Bloodborne and Dark Souls is there's no equipment load, so you you always have like the same speed. Your roll is always the same speed.
Yeah.
You don't have
And Brandon, you said in the review that you had issues with the frame rate. Did you find that ever affected the combat?
Rarely. It rarely ever affected the combat. The majority of the time the frame rate really plays into it is when like something is barreling down on you, right? Or something's off in the distance and you're turning the camera quickly. You know, there's a lot of, like Old Yarnum in particular, there's a lot of smoke, there's a lot of fire, there's a lot of particles going on. And so that frame rate makes it sort of difficult to spot enemies coming at you. There are moments in combat where, you know, that frame rate, you know, you might lose a couple like really precious fractions of a second in order to see an attack coming. But by and large, it's mostly noticeable, and it sort of like pokes holes in that immersion of the game.
So you wouldn't say it ever caused you to die when you didn't think you should have died?
I don't think it ever caused me to die. I think it probably added to the stress and frustration at times, but I mean, that game is just an impressive experience. So, I mean, you know, it's another scoop on the pile.
Sadness Sunday.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, Brandon, one of your favorite things in this game is the world design.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What did you guys think? We already know what you think. What did you think?
Man, yeah.
Excuse me.
Honestly, of
Gorgeous.
anything Brandon wrote in his review, I completely agree with that. A lot of people were sort of underwhelmed by Dark Souls 2's world design.
Yeah.
I wasn't, but a lot of people had that complaint. But man, oh man, every location in this game is visually stunning, visually unique. Everything we've seen leading up to the game that showed just like kind of vanilla Yarnum, that's just the absolute tip of the iceberg.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and the game has a tone that's much different than I thought. Like, we're not going to spoil anything.
No, it goes in such a crazy direction.
Yeah.
Like, I was expecting just like the game. I kind of went into the game a bit blind. You know, I didn't want to know much about it and stuff. But like,
Basically the promo stuff, right?
yeah, like I was
werewolves
thinking like werewolves and witches, whatever, you know. But it goes places.
Yeah.
It goes places that
and
like.
I won't necessarily call them twists so much as like From Software is just like, all right, so things are gonna get weird, and then they double down, and then they double down, and then they double down, and by the end of the game, you're playing like a very different thing than what we assumed. Right?
Yeah, totally.
So.
And you, in classic From fashion, you know, it doesn't, you know, deliver the story in a traditional way, but there is a really cool story here if you're willing to put the time
Yeah,
to dig it.
it's a puzzle, and like putting it together over the next couple playthroughs is going to be super fun. And like, that's such a big part of why I love the Souls series is like you read these item descriptions, and that's kind of your key, you know, to like what's happening and stuff. And there's no like exposition. It's the storytelling is really like married into the experience. It's not like pick up this letter and see what it says about whatever, and then kind of move on.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, we definitely recommend reading the descriptions for items, because really, like super early on in the game, like 20 minutes into the game, you can come across this NPC in a window, and she'll give you a music box. And if you just are like, well, whatever, I don't care, and keep playing, you can just progress through the game. But if you read what the music box is and realize what its significance is to other characters
alludes
in
to
the
a
games,
character, yeah.
it's really cool, and it starts tying these things together, and those things are just peppered throughout the entire game.
And you can actually like return to that window and talk to her after you've done a
Yeah.
thing.
Event,
and-
yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things I both love and hate about From Software games in particular with regard to the items is that the mechanics for the items aren't ever specifically spelled out. Like, I mean, they'll tell you how to swing an axe, but you find an item, it'll never say, use this to do this. It'll always be like, well, some hunters might have heard that this has a certain, correct, you know, and so it's really, mechanics are intertwined with lore and vice versa. Totally. So, but you really can't escape that sort of immersed, you know, experience.
Yeah, you can go 60 hours in, and then suddenly like, someone online discovers this crazy use for this item, and everyone is just like, oh, like of course,
absolutely.
and then.
I wish a lot of that lore and item descriptions and cool stuff like that was just in the loading screens.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at the word Blood-Borne and the little twisty
Yeah.
thing in the corner, give us some of that.
You might forget the name of the game you're playing, though, Mark.
Jeez. Like, that's, to me, that's baffling that the loading screens don't have something. Because other
That
Souls
is a really
games
good
have-
point.
Yeah.
It would be so easy just to throw a random item up there.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
And
Yeah. Or like a little bit of like something you did. You died and a werewolf killed you. Tell me about a werewolf.
give me a ticker. How many players have died so far? You know, something to look at.
Yeah, and with so much going on behind the scenes in that game that there were subtle clues. You would think they would have some subtle clues they would want to show you.
Yeah, I would have loved that. I feel like we generally would have complained. I mean, the load times would still been bad, but at least we would have had something to do during them. Yeah. Another big part of the world design too is like, aside from the aesthetics and the atmosphere and the story, just the actual like gameplay level design is really good. It's really smart. It's just crazy, like sort of MCF-esher maze,
Yeah.
but it always folds back into itself in really cool ways.
Yeah,
Did you
so
guys feel the same way?
I mean, totally echo what you just said as
Yeah.
far as level design. It's like these spider web and these snaking paths that
You
sort
snake
of
figure out
spiders.
snakes.
yeah.
There are balls
snakes
of
are
snakes.
awful.
Yeah.
There are balls of
And
snakes.
there are
in
plenty of
Bloodborne.
snakes in Bloodborne. So
Spiders too.
Yeah.
yeah, there's just all
everything.
kinds of crappy
Yeah.
stuff. But there are all these really like winding paths that like fold back onto each other, and like what you were saying earlier about the lamps. The fact that they are spaced so far apart is really disheartening at times. Reading the comments and going online, I see a lot of people be like, well, I got to the first lamp, I can't get to the next lamp because it's behind a boss. But I think the real triumph between those lamps is finding that shortcut that brings you back to the lamp, right? Like I knew, I really can't believe I'm saying this, but like the feeling of safety, like that washes over you when you open a gate and spot a lamp that you've already activated is so huge, because every time you die moving forward, you just shaved 2-3 hours off of your.
And there's always kind of a lingering feeling of security, almost when you light a new lamp and you're kind of exploring like the initial opening area, and you'll see like those levers, right, that operate the elevators, and you're like, I will return back here eventually. I just need to dive super deep into this like nightmare of a level.
Yeah.
But I will come back here.
Totally, yeah. And it's really, it has it builds a good sense of space in a way that I don't think Dark Souls 2 did. Like Dark Souls 2 sent you to a bunch of different locations, but I think partially because of the fast travel, you never really got a good sense of geography.
They weren't really
Exactly.
interconnected at all.
Exactly.
So that's what shocked me moving from Dark Souls to Dark Souls 2 is I remember very clearly like you go up a ladder, a very long ladder, and you're on the cliff where the cat alligator things are. And you look down and you see the castle, right, with the dragon on the bridge. You see that castle and you're like, oh my God, like I conquered that castle, right? So it's one persistent world, and that's a very powerful experience. And then in Dark Souls 2, it was like, okay, I beat this boss, now a giant bird picked me up, and I'm now in a different area, completely devoid of anything. So I love, and I had a moment like this in Bloodborne where I'm in a house on a ledge, and I look down and I see the entire forest area like unfolding below me, and I can see landmarks like, oh, that's that house, and that's that area, and that's where that thing killed me a million times. So there's still that feeling, that really strong feeling of like consistency.
And it really helps you get a sense of the world too.
Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
super dig it.
Other than the lack of fast travel, is there anything about the world design that bothered you?
Jeez.
Stuff that jumps out.
Yeah,
there's a lot-
this is a horror game.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, this is definitely a horror game.
It's a horror game.
More so even than the other games in the Souls series. Yeah, that, and I'm sort of getting a little bit tired of there's 1,000 things to break, but not a whole lot of reasons to break them.
Yeah, there were.
Souls games?
I was
Yeah.
I was rolling into every coffin, every box, expecting to find random. What were they called? Cold blood dudes.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And they
Nothing.
came few and far between. Also, very few treasure chests.
There were a couple shortcuts.
Hey, did you guys instinctively slash the treasure
Slash
chest?
every single
I
treasure
slashed
chest.
Every single
chest.
chest.
I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
not going to be eaten by a treasure chest this
Yep.
time around.
I haven't seen a mimic
And I
yet.
was not.
I haven't seen a mimic yet, but that doesn't mean they're
I
not
really
out
hope there's
there.
one in there.
So one of the central mysteries of this game then is who's leaving all these empty boxes around.
Yeah.
And we may never know the answer.
That's the DLC.
So Bloodborne is technically not part of the Dark Souls, Demon Souls universe, probably,
Technically.
but it is. It's very closely related to those games, even though it's its own game on a new platform.
Yep.
Is this a good game for a new player who has never played any of the 3 previous games in the sort of series? Is this the good place for them to jump in, or should they go back and play the others first?
Well, I don't think it's necessary. I think this is absolutely as good a place as any to get into it. I would say if you're trying to get into a From game, like this is a much better place to join than Dark Souls 2 was to Dark Souls, right? Like this is a completely new, very familiar but completely new combat system. Things are different. Things behave differently. There's a different pace and a different cadence to everything.
Yeah.
The
And so
combat's-
if you go to Dark Souls and then play Dark Souls, right? Because it's sort of the proto From game, and then come to Bloodborne, it's going to be a very sort of jostling experience.
Yeah,
The,
totally.
the combat's a lot more accessible, I think.
Yeah.
So it definitely, for newcomers to the series, is I think a good starting point.
Yeah, and From streamlined a lot of, there's far fewer statistics in the game.
Yeah.
There's fewer weapons, like the inventory system's kind of streamlined. Everything is streamlined a bit. That's not to say things aren't opaque, and things aren't frustrating, and things aren't infuriating, which, Dan, I know you had that problem with.
I did have a very bad experience trying to get into this game, somewhat famously now.
Yeah. Infamously.
Infamously.
No, I'm kind of a solitary gamer by nature. I also don't like consulting guides. I like to go into a game and discover it for myself, and not be told what to do. I want a game to kind of give me the basic ideas and then say, okay, now you know what to do, go do it. Kind of like in Portal, right? It tells you here are your tools, here's how you use them. Now here's a puzzle, go solve it using those tools. I feel like Bloodborne does a terrible, terrible job of introducing you to its tools and giving you an opportunity to challenge yourself with its puzzles. Instead, you're talking about the shortcuts. I never found the shortcuts in the first area, so I saw the big gate there, but saying this does not open from this side, and I tried to find the entrance, but I was just fumbling around, had no idea of how to get there. I never found it. So I spent way too much time just trying to get to that first checkpoint behind the boss, which was really frustrating because you're always going back to the beginning. Basically, I think what would really help if you're planning to get into this game and have not played any of the previous games, I think the essential thing is don't count on Bloodborne to teach you how to play it. Find someone else to teach you how to play it, whether that's a friend who's already experienced who can give you a tip to okay, you're doing this wrong, or just go to a guide, go to a wiki, go to a walkthrough. Which I find disappointing because that's not how I like to discover my way through games.
But there is the asynchronous multiplayer element, where people can leave each other little notes and hints and stuff, and I found that really helpful my first time playing Dark Souls. And
even here too, right? Because those bloodstains show where potential danger is.
Yeah, you see a lot of those,
Pro tip, everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough.
Even in the Hunter's Dream, people were jumping off to kill
yeah,
them.
So I'm seeing all these tombstones in the Hunter's Dream. I was like, what are you guys doing?
This is a safe area.
It's like there must be something coming up, right?
Yeah.
Like a big eagle drops a rock on you or something like that.
No, it's weird. Like I can empathize with your point because we were all there at one point. I mean, we've put hundreds of hours into the series by now, but when I first booted up Dark Souls to write the guide for IGN, I was like, I don't know what I'm getting myself into, and I hated it for the first 10 hours.
I had the same reaction.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, it clicks, and the games do have this sort of internal grammar and rule set that is very strict, and it's not fair initially. It's not clear initially. It's frustrating initially. But once you understand its very weird and unique language, and doesn't matter how many third-person action games you've played before, these games have their own unique language.
And unique is definitely the right word for it. I would almost call them guidelines rather than rules. Because Dark Souls and I guess now Bloodborne never really breaks its own rules, but it will sure as hell bend them as much as possible.
Totally,
So what is your sage wisdom to pass down to people who are interested? Like you've told them, hey, this is an amazing game, you should play it. How do you advise that they get into it without suffering the way I did because I didn't know what I was doing?
I think inherently suffering is part of the process of a From Software game. I think. I respect your opinion that you didn't like it and all that. I just wish I could stand over your shoulder and sort of coach you through it. But that's not how I like to play games, and that's not how I would want someone to have to play this game. I love to figure stuff out on my own. So it is frustrating at times, and in Dark Souls, I'm trying to think back to when I started Dark Souls, it was very frustrating. I just wish I had someone to tell me what I was doing and what this means. Time and patience and perseverance are really your best tools in a From Software game. Watching things, understanding how they work, getting acquainted with it, and then taking your time, really.
Marty, how about you?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. A lot of it is also in those early areas in the game, really learn the combat mechanics, learn how to bob and weave, learn how your weapons transform, learn how the regain system works. Gain those chops on the dumb enemies at the beginning of the game, and the dumb enemies are still going to kill you. Dumb enemies still kill me every once in a while. I'll still be back in Yharnam, and I'll still die at the first set of villagers.
And then I just put my head in my hands, and I'm like,
I've
beaten this.
Yeah.
I mean, my experience with that is, the problem I experienced was that you die, and then all the enemies come back.
Yeah.
And even though all the items you spent to get past them are gone.
Yeah,
sure.
So it's just you're fighting the exact same guys in the exact same place. It feels like Groundhog Day hell.
Yeah, but you keep
But the Souls games are about like mastery of a system, and that's part of
right. And in Groundhog Day, Bill Murray learned how to play the piano, but he was still in hell.
Yeah.
So the point is it's
enjoying
repetitive.
that hell is part of what
Yeah,
makes me
absolutely.
love these games. Like I loved Dark Souls the first time I played. Like I had no
Well, by the end of the game, it's easily my favorite game of the last generation.
yeah.
By the end of the game, I loved it. But I remember that first
But
uneasy step.
I do think Dark Souls did a little bit more with the level design to kind of train new players, like to get them used to like what the game had in store for them. Like you're in Firelink Shrine after the initial tutorial area, and you go down to the catacombs. Everyone goes down to the graveyard, and they just get destroyed by those skeletons. And they're like, oh, like enemies don't scale with me. I'm not supposed to be down here.
Yeah.
And they move on.
Yeah,
somewhere
and a lot
else.
of it is at
It's
that
just
early stage. Keep going back to Hunter's Dream and keep leveling up and
Grind if
keep
you
learning
have
from your
to.
mistakes.
Yeah.
It's a bummer. But also, you mentioned earlier, it's not for everyone. That goes
Yeah,
for
at
literally
some-
every
at some
video game
point, it
ever.
just- yeah.
But
No game is for well, maybe Tetris. I don't know.
Tetris. I'm sure someone hates Tetris.
There's always that
But
one
anyway.
guy.
But anyway, so the message here is it's an amazing game if you have the
Yes.
patience to
It
get
takes
through.
effort.
Yeah, beware of don't fall in the same trap I did. Get help because it's if you're
help.
getting frustrated, get help because otherwise you're gonna rage quit.
Can we film a Bloodborne PSA right now? Like,
We call it getting
I
frustrated.
think you and I need help. We just spent so many hours
Yeah.
beating this game
I'm
this
gonna
past week.
sleep forever right now.
So that's what we think. For more on Bloodborne, please stay with IGN because we've got lots of it.